At the business dinner, my son-in-law kicked my pregnant daughter because she spilled water. "Watch where you're going, useless!" he yelled for his friends to laugh. I was at the next table. I stood up, wiped her dress, and placed my business card in front of him. The chairwoman's card he'd never seen. He read my name and started to shake. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. The shaking was subtle at first. Just his fingers, holding the thick cream-colored cardstock, then his jaw, then his whole body, like a man who'd just stepped off a cliff and realized there was no ground beneath him. Nancy Price, chairwoman and CEO, Meridian Capital Holdings. His colleague at the end of the table, a man I recognized from industry conferences, David something, grabbed the card from Brandon's trembling hand, read it, looked at me, looked back at Brandon with an expression I can only describe as horror. "You kicked Nancy Price's daughter," David said slowly. "In front of Nancy Price?" Brandon opened his mouth. Nothing came out. My daughter Stephanie was still frozen in her chair, one hand pressed against her pregnant belly where her husband's shoe had connected. 7 months along. My grandchild, growing inside a woman whose husband treated her like furniture. "Stephanie." I kept my voice soft, gentle, the opposite of the storm inside me. "Let's go home." "It's okay, sweetheart. Everything is going to be okay now." I helped her stand. She was taller than me, but in that moment she seemed so small. My baby girl, 29 years old, valedictorian, MBA from Wharton, reduced to this. A woman afraid to spill water at dinner. Brandon finally found his voice. "Mrs. Price, I'm so sorry. This is all a misunderstanding. I didn't mean, I would never." I didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge his existence, just guided Stephanie toward the door, my arm around her shoulders. "The whole restaurant saw you kick her," David said behind us. His voice carried disgust. Self-preservation, too. No one in Minneapolis finance wanted to be associated with the man who'd just destroyed his career in real time. Jesus Christ, Brandon. What were you thinking? I wasn't there to hear Brandon's answer. The maitre d' was already holding the door open, his face pale. Word traveled fast in restaurants like this. By tomorrow, everyone in the city would know what happened at Chez Laurent. My car was waiting. Gerald, my driver for 15 years, opened the back door without a word. I helped Stephanie inside, slid in beside her. "Where to, Mrs. Price?" "Home. The Adina house." The car pulled away. Through the window, I could see Brandon burst through the restaurant doors, phone already pressed to his ear. Calling Stephanie, probably. Or his lawyer. Or his mother. It didn't matter. None of his calls would change what happened. Stephanie was crying silently beside me. I recognized those tears. The ones you learn to shed without sound, without movement, so you don't draw attention, so you don't make it worse. I'd cried those tears once, a lifetime ago, before I built Meridian, before I became the woman who made men like Brandon Walsh shake just by placing a business card on a table. "Mom!" Stephanie's voice was raw. "Mom, I'm so sorry." "Sweetheart, you have nothing to apologize for. I lied to you for 3 years. I told you everything was fine. I told you he was good to me." "I know." I took her hand. "And I should have looked harder. I should have asked more questions. I should have—" "No." She gripped my fingers tight. "This isn't your fault. I hid it. I hid it from everyone. I was ashamed. I thought if I just tried harder, if I was better, he would stop. He always said if I wasn't so clumsy, if I didn't talk so much, if I just— Listen to me. There is nothing you could have done to deserve what he did tonight. What he's apparently been doing for years. Nothing. Do you understand? Do you understand?" A long pause. Then quietly, "Yes." We drove in silence after that. The Minneapolis skyline glittered in the rearview mirror. I thought about all the Sunday brunches we'd had over the past 3 years. Stephanie always arriving alone. Brandon was busy. Brandon had work. Brandon sent his regards. The way she flinched when her phone buzzed. The makeup that seemed heavier than necessary. The long sleeves even in summer. I was the CEO of a $4 billion company. I'd built an empire on pattern recognition, on reading people, on seeing what others missed. And I'd missed this, my own daughter, suffering in silence, while I was too focused on quarterly reports and board meetings to notice. That failure would haunt me forever. But tonight wasn't about my guilt. Tonight was about getting Stephanie safe. The Adina house was dark when we arrived. A 6-bedroom colonial I'd bought after my divorce. More space than one woman needed. But tonight I was grateful for every room. Stephanie would need distance, privacy, time. Gerald opened the door. "Should I stay on call, Mrs. Price?" "Yes. It might be a long night." Inside, I settled Stephanie in the guest suite, the one with the softest bed, the bathroom with the heated floors, the windows overlooking the garden. Trivial comforts, but comfort mattered. "Can I get you anything? Something to eat?" "I'm not hungry." She sat on the edge of the bed, still in her coat. "Mom, Brandon is going to be so angry. I don't know what he's going to do. He's going to do nothing. He's going to stay exactly where he is, and you're going to stay here. And tomorrow, we're going to figure out the rest." "You don't understand. He knows people. His family has money. His father was a judge. He always says that if I ever try to leave, he'll—" "What? What does he say?" Stephanie looked at her hands. "That I'll lose everything. That no one will believe me. That he'll make sure I never see the baby." The rage I'd been suppressing threatened to break through. I took a breath. Then another. This wasn't about me. This was about making Stephanie feel safe enough to rest. Brandon's father retired from the bench 6 years ago. His family's money comes from a chain of car dealerships that Meridian considered acquiring last year. I passed because the financials were weak. I sat beside her. "Brandon has spent your entire marriage making you feel small. Making you believe he has power? You don't. That ends tonight. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to introduce you to the best family lawyer in Minnesota. She handles cases like this every day. High-profile divorces, custody disputes, restraining orders. You're going to tell her everything, and she's going to make sure Brandon never hurts you again." "What about tonight? What if he comes here? This house has a security system that cost more than Brandon makes in a year. And if he somehow gets past that, Gerald is a retired Marine." I squeezed her hand. "You're safe here, Stephanie. I promise you, you're safe." She started crying again. Different tears this time. Relief, maybe. Or grief for the life she thought she'd have. The marriage she'd tried so hard to save. I held her until she fell asleep. Then I pulled the blanket over her shoulders, turned off the lamp, and went downstairs to my home office. My phone had been buzzing nonstop. Text messages, voicemails, emails. Word of what happened at Chez Laurent was spreading faster than I'd anticipated. I ignored all of it, except one message. From Linda, my executive assistant. "Just heard. The entire Walsh family is in crisis mode. Brandon's father is calling everyone he knows. His mother posted something on Facebook about misunderstandings and family privacy. And Brandon himself has apparently been drinking alone at the Minneapolis club for the past 2 hours, telling anyone who will listen that you assaulted him. Assaulted." I'd placed a business card on a table. I typed back, "Meeting tomorrow, 7 a.m., my house. Bring everything you can find on the Walsh family. Financials, legal history, business dealings, all of it." Linda's response was immediate. "Already started." I set down the phone and walked to the window. The backyard was dark, the garden dormant under January snow. Somewhere in the city, Brandon Walsh was getting drunk and spinning narratives. His family was mobilizing to protect him. The machine of wealth and connection that had allowed him to hurt my daughter for 3 years was gearing up for war. They didn't know who they were fighting. They didn't know what I was capable of. But they were about to find out. Linda arrived at 6:45 a.m. with 3 folders and a look that told me she hadn't slept. "Coffee's in the kitchen," I said. "You look like you need it." I look like I spent 5 hours digging through public records and calling in favors. She dropped the folders on my dining table, but it was worth it. Brandon Walsh is not who he pretends to be. We sat at the table while Stephanie still slept upstairs. The January sun was just starting to lighten the sky, casting pale shadows across the folders that would determine my daughter's future. "Start with the basics," I said. "Brandon Walsh, 34, hedge fund analyst at Thornton Partners. His father is Harold Walsh, retired family court judge. Mother is Patricia Walsh, socialite. Sits on 3 charity boards. One older sister, married to a real estate developer. Old Minneapolis money, or at least that's the image. Linda opened the first folder. The reality is different. Harold Walsh retired from the bench 6 years ago after an ethics complaint. Nothing public, but there were rumors about favorable rulings for certain attorneys. The car dealerships you mentioned? 2 of them closed last year. The family wealth is mostly perception at this point. And Brandon specifically? Here's where it gets interesting. She pulled out a stack of papers. Brandon Walsh has been fired from 3 different firms in the past 8 years. Each time, the departure was listed as mutual or restructuring, but I talked to someone at his first firm this morning. He was let go for threatening a female colleague. She rejected his advances. He cornered her in a parking garage and told her she'd regret it. She went to HR, he was gone within a week, but because Daddy was a judge, no charges were filed. I felt my jaw tighten. Go on. His second firm was similar. There was an incident with an assistant. Nothing physical, but enough that they wanted him gone. The third firm, Thornton Partners, is where he is now, or was. After last night, I suspect his position there is precarious. Who was the man at the table? David something? David Thornton. Founding partner. Brandon's boss. The man who'd grabbed my business card. The man who'd said, with horror, "You kicked Nancy Price's daughter." David called the office this morning, Linda continued. Very early. Left a message saying he had no idea about Brandon's personal situation and that Thornton Partners disavows any association with domestic violence. They're distancing already. Rats from a sinking ship. Linda opened the second folder. But here's what you really need to see. 3 years ago, just before Brandon married Stephanie, his previous girlfriend filed a police report. My stomach dropped. What kind of report? Assault. She claimed Brandon pushed her down a flight of stairs during an argument. She broke her wrist. Then, 2 days later, she withdrew the complaint. Said it was a misunderstanding. Said she'd fallen. Let me guess. Harold Walsh made some calls. I can't prove that, but the timing is suggestive. The girlfriend moved to Chicago a month later, changed her phone number, deleted all her social media. I sat back in my chair, looked at the ceiling, thought about Stephanie upstairs, 7 months pregnant, married to a man who had likely done this before. Who would do it again given the chance? What's her name? The ex-girlfriend? Rachel Moran. She's a marketing executive now. I have her contact information, but we may need her, depending on how Brandon plays this. Linda nodded, opened the third folder. One more thing. Brandon's financials. He makes $180,000 a year at Thornton Partners. Good salary, but not enough to support their lifestyle. Stephanie's income. She works at a nonprofit, right? She did until she got pregnant. Brandon insisted she quit. Said he could provide for both of them. Except he can't. They're $90,000 in credit card debt. The mortgage on their townhouse is 3 months behind. And there's a personal loan from his parents for $50,000 that was supposed to be paid back 2 years ago. So he's been using Stephanie's trust fund. Linda looked at me carefully. What trust fund? The one I set up when she turned 21. $2 million invested conservatively. I gave her access when she got married. Nancy. Linda's voice was soft. When was the last time you checked the balance on that trust? The question hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't checked. I'd set up automatic quarterly statements, but they went to Stephanie's address. To the townhouse she shared with Brandon. Find out, I said. Today. I'll need her authorization. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made us both look up. Stephanie appeared in the doorway, wearing the robe I'd left for her, her face pale and puffy from crying. Mom? What's going on? Come sit down, sweetheart. There's a lot we need to talk about. The next hour was brutal. I watched my daughter's face as Linda laid out the evidence. The previous girlfriend, the ethics complaint against Harold, the debt. When we got to the trust fund, Stephanie started shaking her head before we even finished. That's not possible. Brandon handles our finances. He said we were fine. He said the trust was invested in something long-term and we shouldn't touch it. Stephanie. I kept my voice gentle. I need you to authorize Linda to check the balance. She signed the authorization with trembling hands. Linda stepped into the next room to make calls. Stephanie and I sat in silence. The coffee I'd made had gone cold. Outside, the sun was fully up now, reflecting off the snow in the backyard. "Mom, if the money is gone, then we'll deal with it." I can't believe I was so stupid. You weren't stupid. You were trusting. There's a difference. But I should have what? Assumed your husband was stealing from you? Assumed the man who promised to love and protect you was actually a predator with a history of violence? I took her hand. "None of this is your fault, Stephanie. None of it," Linda returned. Her face told me everything before she spoke. "The trust is gone. He liquidated it 18 months ago. The money was transferred to a joint account, then from there to various places. Credit cards, his parents, an offshore account I can't trace without a court order. $2 million is gone. My daughter's safety net, the money I'd worked for years to set aside, stolen by the man who was supposed to protect her." Stephanie made a sound that wasn't quite a sob. She pressed both hands against her belly, where my grandchild was growing. "He took everything," she whispered. "He told me we were building a life. He told me we were partners. You still have everything that matters," I said. "You have yourself, you have your baby, and you have me, is just money. I have more. What I don't have is another daughter. What I won't accept is you staying with a man who hurts you." The doorbell rang. Linda went to check, came back with a grim expression. "Brandon's father is here, Harold Walsh. He's demanding to speak with you." I stood up, smoothed my jacket, felt the familiar calm that came over me before difficult negotiations. Harold Walsh was 70 years old, silver-haired, with the bearing of a man who had spent decades being deferred to. He walked into my living room like he owned it, his eyes scanning the space with barely concealed assessment. "Mrs. Price, this situation has gotten out of hand. Good morning, Harold. Would you like coffee? I would like to resolve this quietly before any more damage is done." He blinked. People didn't usually push back on Harold Walsh. To both families, these things happen in marriages, misunderstandings, tensions. But they should be handled privately, not turned into public spectacles. "Your son kicked my pregnant daughter in a restaurant full of witnesses, then called her useless while his colleagues laughed. Brandon admits he lost his temper. He's very sorry." "I'm sure he is. Now that there are consequences." Harold's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Price, I understand you're upset, but I think you're letting emotion cloud your judgment. Brandon and Stephanie have built a life together. They're expecting a child. Is this really the time to tear everything apart?" I looked at this man, this former judge who had protected his son from consequences his entire life, who had made complaints disappear, who had intimidated victims into silence. "Harold, let me be clear about something. Your son has stolen $2 million from my daughter. He has a documented history of violence against women, and last night he assaulted her in public. There is no version of this where I allow him to continue hurting her. Assault is a strong word. It's the correct word, and if you came here hoping to make this go away with a handshake and a promise, you've wasted your time." Harold's face darkened. "You don't want to make an enemy of me, Mrs. Price." "No?" I smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Harold, I built a $4 billion company from nothing. I've faced down hostile takeovers, regulatory investigations, and competitors who would have destroyed me if they could. You're a retired judge with a failing car dealership and a son who can't stop hurting women. I'm not afraid of you." He stood there for a moment, recalculating. Then he turned and walked out without another word. Linda appeared in the doorway. That went well. That was just the opening move. I looked at Stephanie, still sitting at the table, her face a mixture of fear and something else. Hope, maybe. The first flicker of it I'd seen since the restaurant. The real fight is just beginning. The restraining order was filed that afternoon. Brandon was served at his office, in front of his colleagues, by a process server who made sure everyone in the open floor plan saw it happen. Linda reported that he threw his coffee mug at the wall. By the end of the day, Thornton Partners had placed him on administrative leave pending internal review. David Thornton called my office personally to express his firm's commitment to maintaining a safe and respectful workplace. Translation: They were building a paper trail before they fired him. Stephanie spent those first days in a kind of fog. She slept 12, 14 hours at a time. When she was awake, she wandered my house like a ghost, touching objects but not really seeing them. The baby kicked constantly, she said. The baby knew something was wrong. I brought in a therapist, Helen Carter, who specialized in domestic violence survivors. Stephanie resisted at first. "I'm not a survivor," she said. "He only hit me a few times. Mostly it was just words. Words that made you believe you were useless, that you deserved to be kicked, that you couldn't leave." Dr. Carter was gentle but direct. "That's abuse, Stephanie, whether he used his fists or his voice." The therapy sessions happened in my study. I wasn't present, but I could see the change in Stephanie afterward. Some days she came out crying. Other days, she came out angry. Anger was progress, Dr. Carter told me. Anger meant she was starting to understand that what happened to her wasn't normal. Brandon's lawyers sent their first letter on day 3. They demanded access to Stephanie, citing his parental rights to the unborn child. They accused me of parental alienation and unlawful imprisonment. They threatened to seek an emergency custody order. My lawyer, Margaret Huang, laughed when she read it. "They're desperate. Parental rights don't attach until the child is born. And unlawful imprisonment? Stephanie is an adult who chose to stay with her mother. This is harassment, and the court will see it that way. What about after the baby is born?" Margaret's expression sobered. "That's more complicated. Minnesota courts favor shared custody when both parents are fit. Brandon will argue that one incident doesn't make him unfit." One incident? What about Rachel Moran? What about the 3 firms that fired him? None of that resulted in charges or convictions. His record is technically clean. Margaret held up a hand before I could interrupt. "I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying we need to build a case. We need documentation. We need witnesses. We need Stephanie's medical records showing any injuries he caused." Margaret looked at me with something like pity. Most victims of long-term abuse do. She may not remember them all, or she may have explained them away at the time, but if she went to doctors, there will be records. That night, I sat with Stephanie in the guest room. She was propped up against pillows, a cup of tea warming her hands, looking more present than she had in days. "The lawyers need to know about any injuries," I said carefully. "Times Brandon hurt you that required medical attention." She was quiet for a long moment. "There were a few. 2 years ago, he pushed me against a door frame. I told the ER I tripped. They gave me stitches and a pamphlet about domestic violence resources. I threw the pamphlet away in the parking lot. Last year, he grabbed my arm so hard he left bruises. I told my doctor I'd fallen during a hiking trip. She looked at me like she didn't believe me, but she didn't push. And during the pregnancy?" Stephanie's hand moved to her belly. "He's been more careful since I got pregnant. More verbal, less physical. I think he was afraid of hurting the baby. Last night he forgot to care. He was showing off for his colleagues, showing them how he keeps his wife in line." Her voice cracked. "That's what he called it once. Keeping me in line, like I was a dog that needed training. I wanted to hold her. I wanted to tell her it would be okay. But what I said instead was, 'We need those medical records. All of them. The lawyers will subpoena them if necessary. Will it be enough? It will be a start." The next week brought a new development. Rachel Moran, Brandon's ex-girlfriend, agreed to talk to Margaret. I wasn't present for the conversation, but Margaret briefed me afterward. She's still scared of him, even after all these years. But she's willing to testify about what he did. The push down the stairs, the broken wrist, the threats he made when she tried to leave. Why now? Why is she willing after staying silent for so long? Because she heard about what happened at the restaurant, saw it on social media. She said, Margaret paused. She said she always wondered if he would hurt someone else. She said she's spent 5 years feeling guilty for not speaking up. She doesn't want to feel guilty anymore. I thought about that. About the chain of silence that protected men like Brandon. Each woman staying quiet, thinking she was alone, not knowing about the others. Is there anyone else? Other women he's hurt? I'm looking. These things tend to follow patterns. If there are others, we'll find them. The pattern became clearer as the days passed. Margaret found 2 more women, a co-worker from Brandon's second firm who had quit rather than report his behavior. A college girlfriend who had blocked the memories until a therapist helped her recover them years later. 3 women, not counting Stephanie. 3 women whose lives had been damaged by a man who faced no consequences because his father was a judge and his family had money. That was about to change. The custody hearing was scheduled for March, 2 weeks before Stephanie's due date. Brandon had filed for joint custody and generous visitation, claiming he was a devoted father-to-be who had been unfairly separated from his wife and child. His legal team was good, expensive. They filed motion after motion, trying to delay, trying to wear us down. They demanded psychological evaluations of Stephanie. They subpoenaed her therapy records. They argued that my influence over my daughter was unhealthy and controlling. I sat through strategy sessions with Margaret, watching her counter each move. She was impressive, precise, relentless. "We're going to call Rachel Moran," she said one afternoon, "and the other women. Brandon's lawyers will object, but the judge needs to see the pattern. This isn't about one incident at a restaurant. This is about a man who has been hurting women his entire adult life. Will Stephanie have to testify? Yes. Are you worried about her?" I thought about my daughter. The way she'd flinched every time her phone buzzed. The nightmares that still woke her at 3 a.m. The slow, painful process of rebuilding her sense of self. I'm worried about a lot of things. But Stephanie is stronger than she knows. She'll be ready. The night before the hearing, Stephanie found me in my study. She was 8 months pregnant now, huge and uncomfortable. But there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. I'm not scared anymore. I'm angry. She sat down across from me. I spent 3 years being scared. 3 years walking on eggshells. 3 years believing I deserved what he did to me. And now I'm just angry. At him. At myself. At everyone who saw the signs and didn't say anything. That anger is useful. It will get you through tomorrow. And the day after. And all the days after that. I reached across and took her hand. Use it. Let it fuel you. But don't let it consume you. You have a baby to think about now. A life to build. What about Brandon? Brandon is going to learn that actions have consequences, even for men like him, especially for men like him. And if he doesn't? If the court gives him custody anyway? I looked at my daughter, at the woman she was becoming, forged in pain but unbroken. Then we keep fighting, for as long as it takes, whatever it costs. We keep fighting until he can never hurt you or your child again. Stephanie nodded slowly. Then she did something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. She climbed onto the couch beside me, rested her head on my shoulder, and let me hold her. For being at that restaurant, for seeing what he did, for not letting me go back. I kissed the top of her head. I should have been paying closer attention all along. You're paying attention now. That's what matters. We sat there until late. Not talking, just being together. Mother and daughter. 2 women who had survived men who tried to break them. Tomorrow would be a battle, but tonight, we were at peace. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, the faint smell of old paper and anxiety. The kind of room where lives got decided in 30-minute increments. Brandon was already there when we arrived, seated at the defendant's table with his father and 2 lawyers. He looked different than the night at the restaurant. Thinner, paler. The confidence that had radiated from him was gone, replaced by something feral and desperate. When he saw Stephanie, his eyes locked onto her, not with love, with ownership. The look of a man seeing something that belonged to him, something that had been taken. Stephanie didn't flinch. She walked past him without a glance, took her seat beside Margaret, and folded her hands over her belly. The hearing began with procedural matters, filings, objections, motions, legal choreography that seemed designed to waste time. But when Judge Patricia Coleman finally turned to the substance of the case, everything changed. We're here to determine temporary custody arrangements for the unborn child of Stephanie Price Walsh and Brandon Walsh, she said. I've reviewed the submissions from both parties. Before we proceed with testimony, is there anything either side wishes to add? Margaret stood. Your Honor, we've submitted evidence of a pattern of domestic violence by the respondent. We believe this pattern demonstrates he poses a clear danger to both Mrs. Price Walsh and the child. Brandon's lawyer, a sleek man named Harrison, rose immediately. Objection. The so-called pattern consists of unsubstantiated allegations from women who have personal grievances against my client. There are no convictions, no charges, just rumors and hearsay. There's also the incident at Chez Laurent, Margaret countered, witnessed by dozens of people. My client's mother was present and can testify directly to what she observed. Judge Coleman held up a hand. I've read about that incident. The court takes allegations of abuse seriously, regardless of whether charges were filed. We'll hear testimony from relevant witnesses. She looked at Brandon. Walsh, you'll have ample opportunity to present your side. But I want to be clear. My primary concern is the safety and well-being of the child. If I determine that you pose a risk, that will weigh heavily in my decision. Brandon nodded, his face a mask of practiced contrition. Of course, Your Honor. I only want what's best for my child. The testimony began with Stephanie. She walked to the witness stand slowly, one hand supporting her lower back. 8 months pregnant, due in 2 weeks. She looked vulnerable and strong at the same time. Margaret guided her through the basics. The marriage, the early signs, the escalation. Can you describe the first time Mr. Walsh became physical with you? Stephanie's voice was steady. It was about a year into our marriage. We'd had an argument about money. He grabbed my wrists and pushed me against the wall, told me I was nothing without him, that no one else would ever want me. Did you seek medical attention? Not that time. The bruises faded. Were there other incidents? Yes. Over the next 2 years, maybe a dozen. Mostly pushing, grabbing. Once he slammed a door on my hand. I told the doctor I'd caught it in a car door. And the incident at the restaurant? He kicked me under the table, hard enough to leave a bruise. I was 7 months pregnant. Her hand moved to her belly. I thought about my baby, about what kind of life she would have with a father like him. She? Harrison interjected. Mrs. Walsh, you're having a girl? The child's gender is not relevant to these proceedings, Judge Coleman said sharply. Continue, counselor. Margaret nodded. Stephanie, why didn't you leave sooner? Because I believed him when he said he would change. Because he controlled our money, and I didn't think I could survive on my own. Because his father was a judge, and Brandon always said no one would believe me over him. She looked at the judge. I was wrong about that. I hope. The cross-examination was brutal. Harrison approached the witness stand like a predator circling prey. Mrs. Walsh, isn't it true that you have a complicated relationship with your mother? Objection. Relevance. I'm establishing state of mind, Your Honor. Overruled. Answer the question. Stephanie glanced at me. My mother and I are close. We've always been close. Always? Didn't you once tell your husband that your mother was controlling and overbearing? I may have said something like that during an argument. I didn't mean it. And isn't it true that your mother has a history of using her wealth and influence to get what she wants? My mother is a successful businesswoman. I don't see what that has to do with... Your Honor, the petitioner is attempting to characterize my client as a violent abuser, when in fact this entire situation has been manufactured by her wealthy mother to gain control of her grandchild. Margaret was on her feet. That's absurd. Price witnessed her daughter being kicked in a public restaurant. She witnessed an accident, a bump, an incident that's been blown out of proportion by a woman who has never approved of her daughter's marriage. Judge Coleman raised her hand. That's enough. Harrison, you'll have your chance to present your case, but I'd recommend focusing on facts rather than conspiracy theories. The next witness was Rachel Moran. She appeared via video link, her face pale but determined on the courtroom screen. Moran, how do you know the respondent? We dated for 2 years. We were engaged briefly. Can you describe the nature of your relationship? At first, it was wonderful. Brandon was charming, attentive, but after a few months, things changed. He became controlling, critical. Nothing I did was good enough. Did he ever become physical with you? Rachel's voice dropped. Yes. The night I tried to break up with him, he pushed me down a flight of stairs. I broke my wrist. Did you file a police report? I tried, but then his father called me. The judge. He said if I pursued charges, my life would become very difficult. He said Brandon was just stressed from work. He said I'd probably provoked him. She wiped her eyes. I was 24 years old. I was terrified, so I dropped the complaint and moved away. Harrison's cross-examination was skeptical but brief. He knew pressing too hard on an abuse survivor would play poorly with the judge. The final witness was me. I'd testified in court before, regulatory hearings, contract disputes, the rituals of business litigation. But this was different. This was my daughter's life. Margaret led me through the restaurant incident, what I saw, what I heard, what I did. Why did you place your business card on the table? Because I wanted Brandon to understand who he was dealing with. He'd spent 3 years keeping Stephanie isolated, making her feel small. I wanted him to know that she wasn't alone anymore. He started to shake. He couldn't speak. For the first time, he understood that his actions had consequences. Harrison approached for cross-examination with a satisfied smile. Mrs. Price, you're a very wealthy woman, chairman of a major investment firm. Would you say you're accustomed to getting your way? I'm accustomed to working hard and achieving my goals. And one of your goals is control of your daughter's child, isn't it? My goal is to protect my daughter and grandchild from a man who kicks pregnant women in restaurants. But isn't it convenient that you happen to be at that restaurant? At that exact moment? Minneapolis has a limited number of high-end restaurants suitable for business meetings. Chez Laurent is one of them. The coincidence was just that, a coincidence. A very fortunate coincidence for your case. A very unfortunate coincidence for Brandon. If I hadn't been there, no one would have stopped him. No one would have known. Harrison paused, changed tactics. Mrs. Price, how would you describe your relationship with your son-in-law before this incident? Distant. I saw him infrequently. He discouraged Stephanie from spending time with me. Isn't it possible that your hostility toward him has colored your perception of what happened? What I perceived was a man kicking my pregnant daughter hard enough to make her cry out in pain. My perception is accurate. You didn't actually see him kick her, did you? You saw her react. I saw enough, and so did everyone else in that restaurant. Judge Coleman called a recess for lunch. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Stephanie gripped my hand. Margaret thinks so. The judge seems to take the abuse allegations seriously. What about Rachel? And the other women? Their testimony matters. It shows this isn't an isolated incident. It shows who Brandon really is. Brandon walked past us in the hallway. He stopped, looked at Stephanie, and for a moment his mask slipped. Raw hatred, barely controlled. You're making a huge mistake, he said quietly. You're going to regret this. Walsh. My voice was ice. Step away from my daughter, or I'll have security remove you from the building. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he smiled, a cold, empty smile, and walked away. He's not going to stop, Stephanie said. Even if we win, he's never going to stop. Then we'll never stop either. Whatever it takes. For as long as it takes. The afternoon session brought Brandon's testimony. He was smooth, sympathetic, convincing. A man who'd made mistakes but was committed to being a good father. A man who loved his wife. Who only wanted his family back together. But when Margaret cross-examined him, the mask began to slip. Walsh, you mentioned you've never been charged with any crime. But isn't it true that 3 different women have accused you of violence? Accusations aren't convictions. And your father's intervention in Rachel Moran's case? The phone call telling her to drop the charges? I have no knowledge of that. Your father is sitting in this courtroom. Would you like me to call him as a witness? Brandon glanced at his father. Harold's face was stone. That won't be necessary. Because you know exactly what your father did. What he's always done. Cleaning up your messes. Making problems disappear. Harrison objected. The judge sustained. But the damage was done. I could see it in Judge Coleman's eyes. The calculation. The assessment. The man in front of her was not a devoted father. He was a predator with a family that enabled him. And for the first time, I allowed myself to hope. The ruling came 3 days later. Judge Coleman's decision was 20 pages long. I read it at my kitchen table, Stephanie beside me, both of us holding our breath. The court finds, based on the weight of evidence presented, that the respondent poses a credible threat to the safety of the petitioner and the unborn child. Multiple witnesses have testified to a pattern of controlling and violent behavior. The respondent's own testimony was inconsistent and, at times, evasive. Stephanie grabbed my arm. Keep reading. The court grants sole legal and physical custody to the petitioner. Stephanie Price Walsh. The respondent is prohibited from contact with the petitioner or the minor child except through supervised visitation, to be arranged at the court's discretion. The respondent is further ordered to attend a domestic violence intervention program and undergo psychiatric evaluation before any modification of custody will be considered. Sole custody. No unsupervised contact. A restraining order with real teeth. Stephanie started crying. Not the silent tears I'd grown accustomed to seeing. Real sobs, loud and messy, the sound of years of fear finally breaking loose. I held her while she cried. Didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Later, after she'd calmed down, we sat on the porch watching the late March sun melt the last of the winter snow. Stephanie was due in 2 weeks. The baby was a girl. She hadn't told Brandon that, hadn't wanted to give him any more information than necessary. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we prepare for the baby. Now you start building your own life. Brandon has to live with the consequences of what he did. For the first time in his life, money and connections couldn't save him. He's going to appeal. Probably. Let him. The evidence doesn't change. The witnesses don't disappear. He can spend his family's remaining money on lawyers if he wants. It won't matter." Stephanie was quiet for a while. Then, "I want to go back to work, after the baby comes. I don't want to depend on anyone ever again." "That's a good goal. Will you help me?" "Not with money. With advice. How to build something. How to be strong like you." I looked at my daughter, 29 years old, pregnant, survivor of 3 years of abuse, already thinking about her future, about becoming something more than what Brandon had tried to make her. "You're already stronger than you know," I said. "You survived him. You left. You testified. You won. Everyone needs help. The strength is in accepting it when it's offered." The baby came 2 weeks later. A little girl, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, with her mother's eyes and her grandmother's stubborn chin. Stephanie named her Grace. "Because that's what got us through," she said, holding her daughter in the hospital bed. "Grace under pressure." I held my granddaughter for the first time and felt something shift inside me. All the years of building Meridian, of accumulating wealth and power, of proving myself in boardrooms, none of it mattered as much as this. This small, perfect person, safe because her mother had found the courage to leave. Brandon requested visitation within hours of Grace's birth. His lawyers filed an emergency motion, claiming his parental rights were being violated. Margaret filed a response noting that Brandon had not completed the required domestic violence intervention program, had not undergone psychiatric evaluation, and had violated the no-contact order 3 times by attempting to reach Stephanie through intermediaries. The motion was denied. Stephanie came home to my house a week later, Grace in a car seat, diaper bag over her shoulder, looking exhausted and radiant. "I've been thinking," she said, "about staying in Minneapolis, about buying a place near you, and about work. There's a nonprofit that helps domestic violence survivors. They're looking for someone to help with fundraising and development. I was thinking, with your connections, send me the details. I'll make some calls." It wasn't charity. It was purpose. Stephanie needed something to build, something that would give meaning to what she'd survived. The weeks became months. Spring turned to summer. Grace grew, laughed, took her first steps in my living room. Stephanie started the job at the nonprofit, discovered a talent for connecting with donors, for telling stories that opened wallets, and Brandon Walsh faded into irrelevance. His firm fired him officially in April. The stated reason was restructuring, but everyone in Minneapolis finance knew the truth. David Thornton had made it clear that associating with Brandon was a liability no firm could afford. His father's car dealerships filed for bankruptcy in May. Harold Walsh, the former judge who had protected his son from consequences for decades, was now scrambling to save his retirement. Brandon moved to Phoenix, started over with what remained of his family's money, tried to reinvent himself as a consultant, an entrepreneur, a fresh start. But the internet never forgets. A simple Google search turned up the court records, the accusations, the name Nancy Price, and the night at Chez Laurent. No reputable firm would touch him. No investor would take his calls. He sent Stephanie a letter in August. I read it before she did. I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you. But you have to understand. I was under so much pressure. My father, the job, trying to provide for us. I lost myself somewhere along the way. I'm different now. I'm getting help. I just want to meet my daughter. I just want to be part of her life. Stephanie read it, then tore it in half. He still doesn't get it, she said. He still thinks he's the victim. Men like Brandon never see themselves clearly. That's part of what makes them dangerous. What do I tell Grace? When she's older? About her father? I thought about it. About the stories we tell children. About the truths we shield them from and the truths they need to hear. Tell her the truth. Age-appropriate, but honest. Her father made choices that hurt people. Those choices had consequences. She can decide for herself when she's old enough what kind of relationship she wants with him. And if she wants to see him, then you'll figure that out together, when she's ready, on her terms. Stephanie nodded slowly, picked up Grace, who was babbling happily about nothing, held her close. I used to dream about this, she said, being free, having my own life. I thought it was impossible. I thought Brandon had taken everything from me. What do you dream about now? She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen since before her marriage. I dream about watching Grace grow up, about being the mother she deserves, about showing her that women don't have to accept the lives men try to give them. That's a good dream. It's more than a dream now. It's real. I watched my daughter walk away, my granddaughter in her arms. 2 survivors. 2 women who had escaped a man who thought he owned them. Brandon Walsh had kicked my pregnant daughter in a restaurant because she spilled water. He'd called her useless. He'd made his friends laugh. And now he was alone in Phoenix with a ruined reputation and a bankruptcy file bearing his family name. The business card I'd placed on his table that night had been a warning. He should have listened. Grace started kindergarten at a private school near my Adina house. She had her mother's smile, her grandmother's determination, and a pure, unshakable confidence that came from being loved without condition. Stephanie had become executive director of the nonprofit. Under her leadership, they'd expanded to 3 states, helped over 4,000 survivors of domestic violence, and raised $12 million in the past year alone. She was featured in Minneapolis magazine as one of 40 under 40 to watch. The article mentioned her story briefly, carefully, with her permission. I stepped back from Meridian. Not completely. I retained my seat on the board. But day-to-day operations passed to my hand-picked successor. I was 67 now. I wanted to spend time with my granddaughter, to travel, to read books that weren't quarterly reports. The Walsh family had scattered. Harold died of a heart attack 2 years after the custody hearing. Patricia moved to Florida, lived quietly on what remained of the family money. Brandon's sister divorced the real estate developer and remarried someone wealthy enough to restore her to the lifestyle she expected. And Brandon himself, Brandon had become a ghost. He'd stopped reaching out after the first year. No more letters, no more motions filed. His required child support payments came from a garnishment on his wages, automatically deducted, never accompanied by a note or a request. For a while, we heard rumors. He was working at a car rental agency in Phoenix. Then he wasn't. He was living with a woman in Tucson. Then he wasn't. He was drinking heavily. He was sober. He was getting help. He wasn't. We stopped tracking him, stopped caring. Brandon Walsh was a chapter in our lives that had closed, and we weren't interested in rereading it. I was in the kitchen making pancakes when Stephanie arrived for Sunday brunch. Grace ran ahead, as always, demanding to help stir the batter. "There's something I need to tell you," Stephanie said quietly, once Grace was occupied with a spoon and a bowl. "Brandon is sick, some kind of cancer. His sister reached out last week. Apparently he's been asking about Grace, wanting to see her before—" She didn't finish the sentence. I stood very still, measured my response. "What did you tell his sister?" "That I'd think about it." "And? Have you thought about it?" Stephanie looked at her daughter, covered in pancake batter, laughing at something only 5-year-olds understand. "I've thought about nothing else. Part of me wants to say no. After everything he did. After the way he treated me. The fear I lived in for 3 years. Why should he get any part of her? And the other part? The other part remembers that he's still her father. That she might have questions someday. That I don't want to be the reason she never got to know him. I thought about this. About the woman Stephanie had become. About the impossible choices survivors have to make. What does Dr. Carter say? That it's my decision. That there's no right answer. That I have to weigh what's best for Grace against what's healthy for me. And what do you think is best for Grace? Stephanie was quiet for a long time. Grace finished stirring, demanded syrup, got distracted by a bird outside the window. I think, Stephanie said slowly, that Grace deserves to make her own choices. When she's old enough. But she's only 5. She doesn't understand cancer. She doesn't understand fathers who hurt mothers. She just knows that she has a mommy and a grandma and a life that feels safe. So your answer is no? My answer is not now. Not when she's too young to understand. Maybe someday, maybe never, but not now. I nodded. It was the right answer. The complicated, painful, imperfect answer that real life requires. Do you want me to respond to his sister? I'll do it. Stephanie straightened her shoulders. I'm done letting other people fight my battles, even the ones I'd rather not fight. She made the call that afternoon. I didn't listen, but I saw her face when she came back to the kitchen. Resolve, tinged with something that might have been grief. Not for Brandon, for the family that might have been, if he'd been a different man. Brandon died 3 weeks later. His sister sent an announcement, a small service in Phoenix, no mention of Stephanie or Grace. I showed Stephanie the message. She read it without expression. I don't know what I am. She set down the paper. I thought I'd feel something. Relief. Closure. Something. But I just feel empty, like the ending of a book you stopped reading years ago. That's understandable. Is it? He was my husband. He's the father of my daughter. And I feel nothing. You feel nothing because you did the work. Years of therapy. Years of rebuilding. You processed what he did to you and you moved on. His death doesn't change that. Grace is fine. Grace has always been fine. She has you. She has me. She has a life full of people who love her. Brandon was a name on a birth certificate, nothing more. Stephanie was quiet. Then softly, thank you, Mom, for being at that restaurant, for seeing what he did, for not letting me pretend it was okay. She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much but still held hope. You saved my life that night. I don't think I ever told you that. You didn't have to. I'm telling you now. You saved my life, and Grace's, and whatever future we get to have. That's because of you. I pulled my daughter into a hug, held her tight, thought about the night at Chez Laurent, the kick, the laugh, the business card placed on a table. I hadn't planned to be there that night. The universe, or fate, or luck had put me at the next table at exactly the right moment, had given me the chance to see what Stephanie had been hiding, to step in before it was too late. I would do it again, I said. 1,000 times. 1,000,000. You're my daughter. Protecting you is what mothers do. Grace came running in then, demanding attention, breaking the moment with her boundless 5-year-old energy. Stephanie wiped her eyes, laughed, scooped her daughter up, and spun her around. I watched them, my daughter and my granddaughter, 2 people who wouldn't exist in this form. In this moment, if I hadn't stood up in a restaurant and walked to the next table. That's the thing about power. Real power. It's not about boardrooms or stock prices or how many people answer to you. It's about the moments that matter. The moments when someone needs you and you're there. Brandon Walsh had power once. The power of money, of connections, of a family that protected him from consequences. But his power was borrowed, built on nothing but entitlement and cruelty. It crumbled the moment someone stood up to him. My power was different. Earned through decades of work, grounded in relationships, used to protect the people I loved. That's the difference between men like Brandon and women like me. He used power to hurt. And in the end, that made all the difference. At the business dinner, my son-in-law had kicked my pregnant daughter. He'd called her useless. He'd made his friends laugh. I'd placed a business card on a table and watched him shake. That was 5 years ago. Now my daughter runs a nonprofit that saves lives. My granddaughter is learning to read. and Brandon Walsh is buried in a Phoenix cemetery, forgotten by everyone except the women who still carry his scars. The chairwoman's card he'd never seen, the power he never understood, the mother he underestimated. Some lessons only get learned the hard way. He learned his too late.